Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. We had a little trouble getting things started, but hopefully it'll all be good in a moment. Some things slow, some things lagging. Either way, today we are having a relatively normal lounge, just starting up the end of summer, more or less. At least that's the way we're going to perceive it. And that means some people are not available. But this is probably fine. We are playing with a fully open lounge today, so feel free to join us.
Nature. Fate or a spot! You must purify your soul, mother. You're not bad.
Final round. Fight! Bison win. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
Soul satellite! Soul spot! Yeah! Soul spot! Soul satellite! This will hurt. Yeah!
and Bison win. It's go time. Let's do this.
Fresh and washed, but you might want to rinse them again, knowing the fear is on the green thing in front of you.
Hurry, Bison. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
We're quite familiar with this player, but the difficulty is they have enough good offense that relaxing is hard, and remembering to do things that are specific to this matchup, well, that happens constantly. If you're facing a strong opponent and you're not super experienced, it can be hard to keep that sort of thing going. Fortunately, this player is neither merciful nor, let's say, dishonorable. Disrespectful is the word I was looking for. There are certain players that will just basically go, yeah, I know you can't stop me. Or they will see you do it and then just go, nah, I'm just going to keep doing this anyway, even though you've shown that you know how to do it, I'm just going to force you to do it. It's up to you whether or not you play like this, but note that obviously there are people who don't really have a good reason to play you if you do it. And we are certainly not in that category, because to us it's just, well, I could go fight a bot and practice more. If it's a common matchup, then yeah, you could expect people to know how to solve it. But that's just part of fighting people of lower rank than yourself. They're going to sometimes be unable to defend against your stronger stuff, or lose their cool in situations, in various ways, and if you decide that you're just going to keep doing that sort of thing, it's a completely valid way to beat them, but for them, it's not really worth continuing to fight you. And if that's what you prefer or want out of the game, then absolutely go for it. But that's not generally the experience we have with this player, as far as I remember, in any of the times we've seen them, so I'm more likely going to be expecting a very serious style of play, taking advantage of nearly everything Bison can do. The matchup itself isn't necessarily all that stressful, given who you're dealing with here. Kazuki Dynasty Airu Siren does have a partner to fight this matchup with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every aspect of the matchup is going to feel even similar. This involves blocking a lot, and it often involves re-reversaling Bison off you at a specific point in the string. But calming is difficult. And you can tell because normally she would never get anywhere near defensive the side of that defensive type block. Today we are, as always, basically an Atlantic Rim lounge. Right now it looks like you'd be better off if you were on the east coast of the US in terms of connection to the current players in the lounge. Character select is on. And I'm not sure whether or not our Bison will remain a Bison, as they've been known to play Guile, and I think I've seen them play Akuma at some point. Aha! Akira. Obviously there has been some work done toward this character, but the Wolf does not yet have an Akira bot, nor necessarily the time to practice against Akira bot if he did have one. Fortunately, Nakali isn't that weak against this character. He has enough reach and enough good options at most positions that there's no difficulty in actually reaching to punish. There is difficulty in getting a lot of damage out of the punish. But unlike many other characters where you have to change your punish entirely and hope that you manage to get yourself to keep doing this, Nakali can more or less do the same punishes as usual, except against like one move, and then just kind of relax. There isn't likely to be a problem in terms of landing hits, more so in doing enough damage in total. It's also quite good to, in fact, keep the V reversals going here, because while Nakali does have invincible moves and therefore ways out of this situation, it's not always the best method to be using against this character. She's good at doing big conversions, and with V trigger 1 available, it's easy to get locked down into bad positions.
Round 2.
So you don't really want to be using your meter more than you have to. Nakali has a nice long reaching super, which is a good way to get out of the big brother call. And can usually manage pretty well, as being the specific type of rushdown character that Akira is. Yeah, she can definitely bait you into the throw that beats the V reversal, but it's not going to lead into her better damage, so if you re-reversal her off enough, those times where you choose not to do it, she'll probably give up some actual threat in order to at least break your guard. That was still good because it was basically, yes, you've used up the whole V trigger now, you can't get anything else. Basically, V meter bar was full on Akira's side, big damage was done, granting no more of it. But in this case, I think that's probably going to happen either way, as the use of V's skill 2, while very good against Nakali, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get enough chances to build up meter. If you're landing V skill 2 from Akira on Nakali, you're probably winning.
Round 1. Fight!
One thing that is fairly important in this matchup is to make good use of Nikali's kicks, all 3 of them. Technically all 4 of them if you count the crouching medium kick as well. In fact, just go all in. Just press all your kick buttons whenever it seems most reasonable.
Round 2. Fight.
That specific way of using meter for offense can be really jarring. But yep, we're seeing it start to kick in, literally.
Akira wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Now, of course, this is also a Win 10 Battle Lounge matches week. But, I mean, that's cool. If you know a set of people who benefit from getting beat up 10 rounds, do that. Everyone wins. Well, technically, mostly only you win, and then they... But they get XP, so they still win. Karine, unlike Nikali, has a lot harder time making sure that she actually lands her combos and doesn't drop them halfway against this character. Akira can often push to particularly stressful positions, but you don't really need to V-reversal out against Akira. In fact, technically, you'd want to be able to use the parry in the middle of her strings instead of as offense.
I'll show you the divide in our...
Unlike other characters, well, mostly just Colleen, you don't have to figure out which parry to use, you just have to figure out, is my opponent going to hit another button or not? And if they don't, Karine benefits, because that is... We often teach this. If you think your opponent is going to hit more buttons, then parry. And if you don't think they're going to hit more buttons because they're trying to make sure they don't get parried, then you should hit buttons. That's about it. It is in fact a guessing game, and it does come down to what you think your opponent's mindset is. There's that difficult anti-air, well, rather air-to-air, but the spacing's still right, and everything else works out too. This match is usually fairly fast-paced, and really interesting, but you have to be able to know everything that's going on. Actually, part of the reason for that is that these characters actually have very similar fighting styles. While Karine is not pure Bachi Quan, you can definitely see a lot of influence in it. So, they tend to stand at similar ranges, they have the same sort of ideas as to where to go. Karine just flows a lot more than Akira does. Akira is much more the static version of this. And this gets scaled fairly heavily, which is something she knows from the bot doing it, so there's not as much panic as to what goes on right here, and so on. Unfortunately, that was not enough damage in itself either. Those elbows are in fact only -4, but when spaced properly, you should probably still hit a button.
Fight.
Good jump. But so far, almost all of their jumps have been good. It's more so a question of whether or not they also resulted in effectiveness because of the lockdown aspect of it working. The flashy B reversal. But Karine does get to play fairly heavy-handedly from here, because Akira getting back control or anything is difficult enough that it's not just a walk in the park, I'm going to hit buttons now. A little lag, but the jump space was fine. And that is one of the things Akira Bot will give you pretty quickly.
You
The
win.
jump back air to air, and this actually is because, much like Ken, but unlike Ken, Akira actually gets hit when you do that. Ken has all sorts of ways to like make that a bad idea to do, but Akira will generally get hit.
Round 1.
So, generally she's standing far enough away that Karine shouldn't really actually anti-air, like right there. You can still go for it, definitely, because sometimes if your opponent is slightly off, you still get the anti-air or you get the trade in a way that benefits you. And just backing off and getting out of the way isn't the greatest idea either. But the pressure into jump, especially since, much like Ken, she doesn't actually manage that well after the pressure, you should usually prepare for the back jump. And of course, the bot is good for helping you get used to the precise timing of that punish. That was a moment of thinking,
Round 2.
and Javier knew it was a moment of thinking, and therefore threw. That one is one of the hardest ones to deal with. But, as often is the case, Karine actually can anti-air those. You just have to get used to the idea that a move that you would normally never use with a risk of an anti-air is the correct option, and that being like Jinkaku. So many characters just beat you outright for trying to use this move that you would never think of it as, yeah, I should definitely do that. But it is a valid option in a very specific situation that one can get used to. And too early drops it a little bit. Fortunately, it still changes the mindset, which allows the parry to do its job.
Final round. Fight.
But now at a heavy meter disadvantage, she's going to have to manage either a lot of anti-airs or very pressury mid-range style in order to get through Javier's movement, mostly. Nope. This is one of those situations where just the threat of the meter and of course the lack of meter on the other end makes things really difficult. Since Akira doesn't necessarily do a ton of damage without the meter or without V meter as well, normally you're not really feeling, yeah, I'm going to get beat up directly. And therefore, it's easier to get Akira players to play a little more riskily at this point before maybe there's more tech to be learned, but right now,
Round 1.
they'll take at least some risks despite the character being so generally squishy. Whether that risk is dash or jump is up to the player, and often part of the matchup, but it's important enough that they'll basically kinda have to do it at some point, But when they have enough meter and can go well, I'm just going to wait for some conversion. It's very different. The situation is much better. So technically, this situation is the opposite. Now Akira has no meter, and therefore probably has to do a lot of jumping. And whether or not this works is mainly down to which jumps are used. Because while that is dangerous, that kick, it's not like, oh, you're crippling me, I can't play footsies right now, kick. And that results in it being relatively even. But now we're back to something. And this match is probably going to turn around the moment that that bar reaches full. But that was probably one of the best things you could do.
You lose. Let's do this.
Where would that have gone the last time we used it for anything?
Round one. Round two. Fight.
good catch on the recovery, but at the end of the day, we still have the same issue, and maybe we'll get the chance to see
Vega
what
wins.
progress has been made on D-Wolf's side against this character, because there was quite a lot of training done for that. Cosmowolf is probably trained a lot less against Claw for various reasons,
Round 1.
but the use of the other V skill does slightly help here, as it's easier to play the mid-game and just be able to randomly be a threat, or punish things, or semi-punish things that you would not be able to do if you were using V skill 2 the way Devil was. That said, actually landing hits and not getting outmaneuvered is not exactly easy here. In fact, one of one's better options in this matchup, if you are not particularly confident, is to give Claw a little bit too much leeway, see if whether or not the player will try to get something flashy and then punish it. It's kind of slow, and depending on the person's playstyle, it might just not work at all because they'll just drag it out. But if you're running fairly even with them, there's some options. Most of the time this basically comes down to not actually anti-airing. Like, don't even try the anti-air. If you try the anti-air and fail it, terrible things happen. If you block and just get jumped in on, Claw isn't really a pressure character, as just demonstrated. You kinda end up getting pushed back a lot of the time, depending on their mindset. You can be reversal out of a lot of their better pressure, let's say. And tick throws are not exactly this character's strong suit, even though they're easily possible. So, yeah, if you are not confident, just let them jump and block it. This does not, however, apply to the wall dive, and that is why the wall dive is the main thing that we push for the bot to do. Now, depending on what your inputs were and how good you are at actually fighting the bot in other ways, its tendency to wall dive in threatening ways will change, but know that for the most part it's in there if you play even reasonably well. In fact, the more often you counter the wall dive correctly, the more often it will be done differently, and therefore force you to learn more ways to counter it correctly. So even though sometimes it just seems like he just keeps on doing the same non-threatening wall dive, that's kind of supposed to get you into the idea of the move. Punish that one a few times and his rhythm normally changes, and you'll have to deal with the other ones. Particularly if you end up pushing him toward the corner as you go.
Vega wins.
So we'll see if DeWolf is fortunate enough that Javier also just plays Claw again, and he gets a chance to test out all of his hard work. Ooh, on Tavern even. Not to say that this is likely to lead to any actual use of the move, but that would be an interesting twist, to say the least. But
Round one.
we will certainly be able to watch this flow out, because there was a lot of training done. I mean, a lot. But it was, again, mostly wall dive training. So if wall dive isn't used because footsies is never lost, then it won't even matter. Jump was a big gamble. A good one, because it pays off a lot when you do get hit, but it was still a big gamble.
Two. Fight.
And so one is faced with the eternal reminder that
Vega wins.
two players of the same character do not have to play in any way the same. Certainly not at this level. What you need against one is not what you need against the other, and when I say at this level, it doesn't even matter because we are talking about Platinum here.
Round one. Fight.
The neutral drop medium kick is a functional air-to-air hairdo, and it covers almost all of the spaces where the uppercut doesn't work or where you don't think you'll be able to have the uppercut done in time. So, this is entirely possible. Based on a different training against a different plot, but still possible. Unfortunately, basically once your opponent has become literally convinced that you won't be able to end here, the crawling beast is no longer threatening, more or less at all. They know they can jump over it, or that if they do get end here, it's not likely to be because you were setting them up for it, simply because you had more time to think about it, which is not really the same thing, because they could stress you out in some other way, make you think they aren't going to jump, make you start focusing on how to use the crawling beast itself for offense, then jump and you're back where you started.
Let's do this.
I'll show you the epitome of beauty.
For Karine though, this changes quite a bit, because she probably does not have to deal with as much of the frustration of dealing with the wall dives. And it's not as if she's incapable of it. She mostly just gets frustrated not playing footsies and having the opponent constantly back off and use it. Some people will try it that way, and other people will attempt to play footsies with their superior reach. And if that's what we see, then a lot of her other training is probably likely to pay off, but not necessarily likely to come into a win position. Medium Mujin Kyaku is a strong weapon in this matchup, but only when Vega has not gotten anything started yet. You're going to get hit for using it, but it's based on the fact that Vega must push into a specific space, and Karine does not push herself much into spaces when using this move at first. So, it's one of those things she can use at a very long range, and expect that any punishment for doing it is going to be way less than pretty much any other move she has as an option. In fact, this is precisely the move you use when you think you're about to face offense, but Claw is not quite in the position for the offense yet. Karine shouldn't go on the offense herself normally, or do anything you're not comfortable with or confident in, but yeah, you can just throw out the medium Mujin if you are reasonably sure they're coming for you. But there is the other half of why it's useful. The fact that the opponent has something to wait for now means that your offense is able to be better. They can't just throw out buttons because things are going to help them, and they can't just decide to push on you immediately, so you get to push on them a little bit. It's the same sort of thing. If you feel as if your opponent is waiting for you to do the Mujin, and therefore going to punish you for doing it, attack. If you think that they're going to hit buttons, do the Mujin. That's basically all there is to it, really. But, of course, all of that is, as mentioned, helpful when Claw hasn't already gotten started. This is another match similar to Akira where just parrying in strings is really useful, particularly because this character doesn't get a whole lot out of, like, whiff punishing her parry compared to most.
Round one.
The crush counters send you flying, they don't combo well, etc. So managing to get up to or understand your position relative to use of your V-meter can be really helpful just for defensive purposes. You just sit there with the meter and let it wear down its usual super slow way. The most important part of this really is the level of comfort that just deciding, yeah, I might be in Mujin or I might not. And being able to relax in a match can be one of the most important things for getting you closer to actually winning that match. In this case, it's hard to decide whether or not to actually use it, but now that they're separate again, that was a bet that didn't pay off.
Round two.
Still, the amount of control we are seeing from Javier's end here, like that, means that Karine can't just do whatever she wants. She has to either focus in on, am I jumping? Am I using the move in? Am I looking around for something? And giving yourself a moment to breathe when you have already been overwhelmed, even if it means you're just going to lose because you took the moment to breathe, is still a better thing to do for yourself in total. Because learning the game through panic modes generally results in slower progress. Not none. Definitely you still get something out of this, but you often do better. Unless you're really, really comfortable being panicky and twitchy, mashing your way out of everything and, like, confusing your opponent, you're better off this way. There are a few people like that, but generally Karine players are not among them.
Let's do this. Round one.
This matchup isn't one we've seen a lot of yet. There's some data on it from OmniRabbit's perspective, but y'all wouldn't have heard about that. For Akira, this matchup actually seems kind of hard. Laura's range doesn't lose, certainly. I feel as if it can be overwhelming if you're not willing to take a very large amount of risks on Akira. And the President is not usually a risky player, meaning that this matchup might be an uphill battle just based on psychology alone. The neutral jump and similar things make it too hard. Oh, maybe it's laggy. But even so. Oh yeah, it definitely is laggy somewhere. Seems to be better now, maybe? Okay, at least fighting back is happening, so maybe it cleared up. Or got at least somewhat better. One of the main problems is that while Akira can definitely set up for the anti-air, the best timing for Laura to jump is exactly that point where Akira's thinking about going on the offense. So you have to be able to keep both your offense and your anti-air reaction in mind at the same time. And that can be a long training to get used to.
Laura wins. Round one. Fight!
That punish is actually somewhat difficult because it's similar to the point in the Kenbot. You don't actually wait for Akira to finish her EX kick to do the punish. If you have a crouching punish, you do it after the second kick, because the higher third kick will go over your head. So bear it in mind, it might come up for quite a few characters that you just hit her out of it and keep going. Learning the timing for it can be a little difficult, but as always, that's what bots are for.
Akira wins.
One fortunate part of this matchup for Akira is that there isn't really a good way to use your meter. I mean, this is true for a lot of Laura's matchups. You just end up sitting on it until you've got something to armor through, something you're really confident that you need to armor through. But this means that Laura has to use her momentum to get through this. And while you absolutely can get an explosive hit eventually, Akira isn't a character that you get to punish with full combos most of the time. meaning that you end up not spending the meter for much other than managing to get full punishes. But similarly, because the way Lara's meter tends to cause things to work, you don't get any corner pressure if you use it that way. This whole thing starts to turn into a really long slog, mostly. Oh, drop the combo! But at least the anti-air was there. President is always on point with those.
Round 2. Fight. Final round.
Well, not getting discouraged is a really important part of playing Lara. Sure, you can work on all your momentum combos, but because they are momentum and because you can therefore get shut down fairly heavily, yeah.
Lara wins. Let's do this.
Now here's a fight where Lara really can use her momentum and can also be just knocked out of it. But again, important to just not be discouraged when you've got enough life to keep going. One of the most important things you can ever learn when playing this character is life leads are not real when you're playing Lara. It does not matter what your opponent's health looks like. Even when you don't have like that much meter, it still doesn't matter what your opponent's health looks like because grapplers are mix-up characters most of the time. And she has just enough capacity to just play footsies without doing specific single things. In fact, that was probably what I'd say was one of the biggest things that made people view Zangief differently, even though the character wasn't all that different, really. People played Zangief differently in this game. They played Zangief with much more difference in movement. I guess probably because he lost the Banishing Flat, the green hand, and therefore couldn't get into positions. He had to use a lot more things that he had available.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
You know, I've seen this costume before, but I've never seriously thought about it. What is this woman doing? How are you grappling in sandals? Sunset wheel. And a wiggle to try to bait an uppercut, I think. It wasn't a full shimmy, so...
Final round. Fight!
Being able to understand Lara hitboxes takes a long time, but it's really important to learn them, because she can do so many things that you would not expect, and interrupt so many things that you also would not expect. Without it, you end up playing the character much more defensively than is generally necessary. We've often joked about the Illuminati button where you, against almost every character connected to Gil, you just press crouch heavy punch and things happen. But against most bruiser style characters, she basically gets to hit forward heavy punch for free because they can't hit buttons about it until they're much closer in. She hits with the edge of it, and then hits like jab or something. She's in, she has some advantage, and things mostly just work out from there.
Lara
But in order to
wins.
know that that's going to work, you have to understand that if they hit most of their useful buttons, she'll actually hit them through it. Against certain other characters who are similar, just her stand heavy punch does the same thing. These are all, of course, risky things to do, but the payoff is usually really large.
Let's do this.
We have moved on to the next king, the X-King. The X-King that is the actual king. You know what I mean. Sagat is not difficult for Nikali to deal with, purely because, especially with the crawling beast, you can just duck under these things. But if you do this from too far away, you get nothing for it, so you must approach to a range where you can do this successfully. This is also the range where Sagat should probably just hit Tiger Knee.
Round one.
When fighting far apart, it's going to come down a lot to how willing Sagat is to use the Tiger Knee to get positioning. Sagat doesn't terribly heavily benefit from cornering Nikali. I mean, it's not nothing. But if you're playing the trigger 1, it's less helpful as well, because all you're getting out of it is a very weird type of pressure that often involves basically gambling. That said, there is a way to do this. Definitely a way to do this without putting yourself at too much risk or thinking about it. Rather than trying to get the opponent to the corner, use all the space behind you and just make use of the fact that you do have good pushback options. If Tiger Knee was slightly better as an anti-air, it'd probably help you more. But you see it used even there, just being able to EX Tiger Knee just semi-randomly neutral. I mean, it's just kind of stressful for Nikali's side. And Sagat is generally going to benefit from that stressed state.
Sagat wins. Round 1. Fight!
You might ask then, what's Nikali to do? Well, you can absolutely move forward using just the opening dagger sometimes. This move allows you to build up charge for other things, and while obviously it won't save you from the tiger itself, you can usually use it right after one has been used, if you think you have the right range for it. Because again, it's the same sort of relatively binary decision. If you thought that another projectile was going to be thrown, you could just immediately do crawler things and get away with it. If you thought it wasn't going to be thrown and Sagat was going to try to get some positional advantage, and not just backdash for example, then forward heavy punch and go for it. This move is extremely punishable for nearly every character. Sagat can of course punish it as well, but landing the full punish does depend on the spacing you're at.
Sagat wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Well, looks like they intend to hang around for longer than their 10 wins, at least a bit.
Dare you challenge the king?
One fortunate thing for Karine is that her jumping heavy kick actually is not quite a zoning jump, but because Sagat is also so tall, it's a valid counter. And it's a valid counter because she doesn't have to hit the heavy kick, which means it's possible to make the tiger uppercut miss. Learning the exact spacing for this is a long process, and it also matters based on like which uppercut they're ready to use. So it isn't like a main strategy you should just be throwing out there. Fortunately, Sagat eventually puts Karine at this space without you having to think about it. Once you've blocked like 2 tigers from close up, you're already there and you don't have to think about it. You shouldn't necessarily jump immediately, but know that you have the option to do so. If you've been pushed away, figuring out how to get back in is not as important as figuring out if you want to get back in. In fact, that's probably the perfect example. Do you feel as if Sagat is waiting for you to jump, or do you feel as if Sagat is setting up to throw another projectile? If you feel one thing, go one way. That move, however, is universally good in this matchup against Karine, because she doesn't really have a lot of ways to get out of the way of it. And even the ranges she jumps from will still get clipped by the tiger knee a lot of the time. You can definitely think of this as a very long-range version of footsies, rather than just doing her normal walk up and do stuff. Karine has to think more about, can I jump? And jumping becomes a form of the footsie game here. Once she's too far out, then that's the response, so you don't have to worry about that either. At mid-ish ranges, the Mayoken does the job. But all of these things rely on you recognizing what Sagat's state is without watching your own character as much. Something you can definitely train, but it's not just innate to everyone. More or less, there's a space in between these 2 characters that Karine needs to attack, but it's not specifically Sagat. This does, however, allow you to change your mindset at least. She doesn't need to try to get closer to Sagat in order to play footsies or play out this matchup at all. And once she's in, she can go ahead and just do pressury strings until she is basically safe or gets uppercut. You'll notice in fact that a lot of the time that Kazuki Dynasty takes any damage, it is from doing the opposite, from not playing footsies at mid-range, but going in because, you know, a knockdown appeared to be a place where going in would work. Normally that isn't how this matchup will go though.
You lose.
Players with a stronger zoning game as a whole will time their projectiles differently to encourage you to jump over them when you shouldn't. But that's literally core Street Fighter.
Round 1. Fight.
Because, yes, you can get to the point where if they just keep on throwing projectiles, you don't get to do anything. But focusing on the uppercut means that there's a lot of spaces where nothing's going to happen. Karine doesn't have to worry about much.
Round 2. Fight.
And it's that freedom to just go, no, I can play from over here. Or as I like to do it, you are a very tall man. Since Sagat's pressure strings are not so great themselves, Sagat playing the opposite and rushing in to get closer to Kareen on knockdowns or on situations like that doesn't tend to pay off for Sagat either. So you can basically freely wake up backward and all sorts of things.
You win.
But this is actually a really complicated concept that I'm trying to condense down as it's happening on screen. I hope you're getting something out of this if you care, but I can't really explain to you how to learn to play footsies from half a screen away. If you want experience, you can go by Under Night.
Round one. Fight.
Someone will make you. Our Sagat bot is therefore meant to teach you this, specifically how to manage to get combos off those jump-ins, when to not even try to combo your jump-ins, etc. Even with that flow though, still.
Round two. Fight.
Sagat is generally better off using the other V trigger for this matchup, because there's going to be a lot of specific need for really well spaced kicks, and having the capacity to use those and do more damage really helps. The Tiger Cannon, on the other hand, while it does offer some more options for the same sort of situations, you're probably just going to get maybe a conversion to damage, and conversions are not the heavy part of this matchup for Sagat, so you might want to consider, if you are normally in a situation where you don't get to use that one, but like it, this is probably one of those matchups where you get to make good use of it. That was one of those situations where you have to think even deeper into what the matchup lets you do. Arcarine is not used to, I'm going to backdash now, being a good thing to aim for. But if you are winning by playing half-screen footsies, and your opponent's offensive pressure isn't that good, you could backdash out of a lot of things. Sagat's heavy kick and heavy punches to check your backdash in particular are not so great, which means you often get away with it.
Let's do this.
Now here's a matchup where I feel like Necalli actually just has a straight up advantage. These characters stand at similar ranges, do similar sort of things, The only difference really is that Kage's medium kicks are better, but Mikali can use heavy kicks in the exact same spaces. Plus, Kage's conversions don't all work as well as they could on Mikali's, so the main problem Mikali will face is the problem everyone faces against Kage. If you don't forward dash out of certain setups, you're going to get jumped on, and if you get jumped on, you're going to die.
Round two. Fight.
That is one of Kage's best counters, but that's precisely why I think that Kage isn't so great in this matchup. Kage's best counters are extremely unsafe if they're baited. Now, of course, Mikali would have to then bait them and give up a lot of the offensive power that's required to actually win, but the fact that you can just do it means that it's volatile, and it's not necessarily volatile in a way that favors Kage at all, in my mind anyway.
Kage wins.
Fortunately, there's that move, and Mikali's best bets for dealing with that are usually uppercut in time somehow, or just re-reversal off, because you can just re-reversal that move off whenever you want. Mikali also barely needs V-Trigger in this matchup.
Fight.
There's no need to catch this character, there's no need to enhance any specific thing or have certain moves available. It's just, I can beat you just straight up, so honestly you might as well re-reversal your way out of a bunch of these things. I go so far as to say that activating your V-Trigger in this matchup is probably a mistake most of the time, because it's not gaining you anything from Mikali's side, unless you're doing it as a confirm and I'm now going for the kill. If you're doing it just, okay, I'm enhancing myself, particularly with V-Trigger 1, you just run out of it and the match turns into this. You could of course still win, but you were in the position where you could have done that better if you had a V-reversal to use.
Round two.
It really comes down to how much you think you can get out of the V-cancel or the conversion, or that one unguarded moment where the extra speed really helps. But otherwise, don't really think of this match in general as a position where you care about your V-trigger. Not least of which reasons is that you can be baited into using it like that and then die.
Kage wins. Let's do this.
Kage is not terribly intimidated by Nakali's V skill too, but it does tend to lead to better setups
Round
when you
one.
do get an advantage, obviously.
Fight.
Not necessarily setups in terms of, oh, Kage is going to get hit by this, but it locks down a lot of the positions that Kage would want to get to if left alone after a knockdown. And sometimes you want to leave Kage alone after a knockdown. You don't want to get uppercut, you don't want to get into that situation where your meeting wasn't perfect and Kage has begun to use range pressure. So sometimes you want to leave them there. And that can be really helpful as a tool for putting them into a position where they can't just do more things. Timing it perfectly off of most of the knockdowns that occur in this matchup would be less likely, because these characters don't really give each other much chance to just play around with stuff in neutral. This isn't a very whiff-punishy matchup is all I'm saying. Even if there were specifically well-placed or well-timed anti-airs, the same thing would probably happen. Fortunately, Doof is actually pretty experienced with this, as Kagebot is one of the bots that is both available and often used. We've mentioned it on streams recently as training has been done. And more explicitly, just being used to what a character does in particular situations can really help you feel out how a player is going to function, what they are doing, what they're not bothering to do, and what you can take advantage of because of that. The randomness of bots does help out here, because sometimes a bot will just repeat actions 1, 3, and 5 for 16 repetition rotations and never touch 2 and 4. And that gives you a chance to feel out what a player who only uses certain tools might be like. This doesn't work on most of our advanced bots, but they're also timed a little differently, so you get a lot more things done from their side. Kage is not particularly advanced in that way, and therefore you can get this experience. Unfortunately, Kage is also hard to input for certain things, and you can end up with a Kage bot that does like no overhead kick, even though technically you should probably try to fix it if it doesn't do any of them. But you can definitely end up with Kage that does it way less than you'd probably like, or does it too predictably. But yes, this exact position you see happening is probably really useful. The reverse link Kage tends to cause the knockdown. It puts Nakali in better positions because the knockdown takes long enough that Nakali can walk into good positions, or bait things, or any number of things like that. You get to play fairly calmly when you're able to do this. And you can just put down the Crawling Beast to possibly lock down or get even more immunity.
Round 2. Fight.
It also helps that when your opponent has gotten used to you constantly using the V-reversal, they might try to bait it, but Kage is not great at that. Or they might just expect it and wait for it, which allows you to do things like that. When they've gone a little too far, they're now just hitting you for the sake of making you waste it. If you're able to recognize this, it usually means you have more of an advantage than you'd otherwise have. Unfortunately, in the end, it's all going to come down to the same thing. Can you anti-air? Can you dash under instead of anti-air when that's necessary? And so on. Perfectly spaced that kick, but not much can be done about that one. As far as I'm aware, even if Nakali had responded with his own super, it's one of the few situations where there's a chance, based on the timing, that Kage will still win out. Most characters just lose to Nakali's super no matter what stage of their own they're in, but I think it's possible for that one to turn out in Kage's favor some of the time. But this might just be something I saw happen when I was helping or observing a training session against the Kagebot, which, again, if input correctly, quote, often does manage to super you, is kind of the point.
It's go time. Let's do this. Akira.
Because Karine so often has to use her meter in this matchup, she doesn't get away from Big Brother as easily. But she often doesn't need to, because the situations in which Akira has enough to go for a true setup is the thing that she's good at avoiding. We now have a player who is much less likely to play with the specific form of offense we saw earlier in the stream reel. And that technically means that our Karine can play a lot more patiently. Basically, while Akira has good offense as a whole, it's based on a thing that this particular player doesn't do and hasn't necessarily trained a ton, resulting in this sort of situation where yes, there's damage, but there was a lot spent for that damage. Sometimes, understanding a character by playing them isn't strictly possible if your instincts don't match up.
Round 2.
Because the way that certain characters, let's say, need to be played will just not be the thing you standardly do. We're watching someone who normally plays G and plays relatively patiently, goes for the anti-airs, goes for like good footsie positions. Playing a character that is basically required to do a very specific type of rushdown, and while it definitely can work to some extent, understanding which parts of the rushdown must be risky is quite hard. Since her damage isn't quite as explosive as you might think, it's kind of difficult to get through it all. And, of course, Katsuki Dynasty has had more time against the Kira bot, which is exactly what we were talking about before. More time against the Kira bot,
Round 1.
in a way, has made her less concerned about this matchup in this form, because she's now aware of, okay, these are the things that Akira does to me that are actually scary, and you are doing not most of those things, so I can spend some time doing all the other stuff that I'm used to doing. Since playing to the strengths of the character is a lot harder when you're not used to this type of character style. Basically, it's easier to look at even losing part of the life lead and go, okay, yeah, I get it, but I know how this character works, I know what she does that's strong by most standards of strong, so if you're not doing it, I'm not as scared. I understand how to do things like that, walk through this thing, walk through that thing, not care about this other thing.
Round 2.
And with basically no good long range options, the President can't use the standard keep out into anti-air game because Karine doesn't really need to jump here. The 100 quote-unquote missing health is probably not helping the matter either. even this situation isn't scary, because again it's a matter of knowing who you're fighting. A different type of Akira becomes very terrifying in that moment because they've got all of this option space to fill. But a more defensive player will probably give you some space in order to prevent themselves from getting caught up in anything crazy. And therefore, again, one of the strengths of the character is underutilized. But death by round start with Senha. Even this may not matter though, because again, this isn't about the same sort of thing. The matchup you're seeing is one that has been more or less decoded by one player's side. When you fight a Akira bot for long enough, those spacings become really easy to learn. She is not a character that basically moves around at all when doing things. She punches very straight, she kicks very straight, when she does move, she moves very straight. So you know that the situation's pretty binary, either you're in range or you're not in range. This is in fact one of the reasons why her forward heavy punch is so critical to how you play her. You don't have to use the move that often, but you have to at least threaten it, because if you don't threaten it, people will just go, well, you're not going to do anything here to me.
Let's do this.
Her kicks are also a good use for this, but if you try to use her kicks against someone who you are pretty sure is just going to block, then you have to be really, really good at spacing them. And as we mentioned before, when you were watching our other Akira play, the whole point of placing the kicks in that way is that you then get to jump.
Nikali. Round one.
It is once again Nikali time.
Fight.
One of the most important things in this particular matchup between players is that both these players have to backdash out of each other's ranges. Both because of what reaction they get when they backdash, and because they need to reset, or you're just going to end up with a situation that neither one of them actually knows how to handle. And this is of course why, as we mentioned before, whoever gets the other one to the corner first and really commits to that normally wins. Otherwise, you just get this. It tends to be a bit more of a brawl than most. And the longer you see them go without backdashing, the more likely it's going to come down to some random close range interaction, because they must also use up all their meter in order to safely stay at these ranges. Now of course it doesn't have to be backdashing, you can walk back. But you can see that interaction there, there's no benefit to trying when you aren't sure. You have to be sure that your situation is in your favor before it's a good idea to stay close. And again, this really applies to both sides, which is kind of odd. You don't normally find a situation where both players are so unsure of what's about to happen that they both want to backdash away from it. Karine usually can just walk right into Nikali's range and clip or throw. Nikali can use a number of tools actually. But in almost all these cases, backdashing will either get you out of this or minimize the damage you take from it.
Round one.
So if you're not feeling comfortable or confident in your offense in this matchup, get out of the position you're in. Reason why backdash is usually more important is because if you're fairly far apart, both Kareen and Nikali have a powerful enough sweep that they'll probably catch the other if you just try to walk. This also works if you hit the sweep early enough because you think you're going to catch the backdash. But that's usually not such a good idea. You obviously worry about getting blocked. But even the slightest hit that your opponent has chosen to walk backward usually means they're going to keep doing that, and you're going to get away with it.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Now one could try to bait the sweep by wiggling the movement, but given that they both have options that would beat that relatively handily too, it's not really a great idea. Uppercut red. Now the interesting thing is that once you are out, once you are far apart, you don't generally want to stay there for very long. The point wasn't to put distance because that distance is going to give you an advantage. It's that neutral at that range is easier to play. For Kareen's side it is easier to play proactively, and for Nikali's side it is easier to play reactively.
Final round. Fight.
A perfect example. One player lost a lot of their health from not backdashing at the beginning, and then the other basically just didn't backdash either. I'm sure I have authorization to tell you outright that both these people are fairly stubborn, and therefore this results in this situation a lot. But
You win.
I always have to scold them because I don't really feel as if they benefit that much from this. If you are a really high level Kareen or Nikali player and can share any insight as to what you're supposed to do at that range that is reasonably guaranteed to be advantageous to you, please let us know, because so far I cannot find any reason to not just backdash out of the situation on both ends. But, as noted, the point is not to backdash and stay there. The point is to backdash, figure out what your opponent did in that space of time, and then make a rapid decision. Basically our Kata 30 series. You are backdashing to see, you are not backdashing to escape, and then just stay away. And this is something you have to train, because if you don't train seeing what is happening when you're backdashing, and specifically watching it just because that's what you need to do, you'll end up in that situation a lot.
Round 2. Fight.
That moment to breathe is also really important though. You just relax long enough to make less rash decisions. This often saves you a lot of meter. And of course it's much easier to see that you actually made a mistake rather than just feeling, oh, I probably hit the wrong button, or oh, I should have waited a little longer for them to mash. That's not really valid because you don't have any guarantee they're going to mash. Even if you feel like your opponent is often mashing, it's more likely you're just remembering all the times they mashed and won, and kind of downplaying all the times you mashed and won.
Final round. Fight.
Of course, the next level of this is recognizing those rare moments where you don't have to backdash, where you actually can just counterattack.
You lose. Let's do this. Necalli wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
But as always, we got lazy and wanted to just let these two duke it out for the last on-stream match of the night. And we're lazy enough that the lounge is probably closing up pretty soon too. Our plans for upcoming content are going to pick up again because obviously this is what happens when the summer ends. And of course, Melty Blood is coming out soon. One of the few things that we are definitely going to probably just play a lot. So this is going to rely a lot on both the netcode and, honestly, the training mode. If we get bots at least on the level of Under Night, which is, I would assume, the standard for that style, then we'll probably have some release to do and some practice that can be done just, you know, normally. So you can look out for those in the coming weeks once that game releases. And until then, expect to see us every Monday as always for other Mish-Mashing Battle Lounges. Any other content we put out you can find information on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC. And of course, all bots can be found at 2-mk.org. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.